Okay. Hello, everyone. Today we are doing the payroll focus year-end timeline, but we are doing the same class that we had last week because we found out that we weren't recording like we expected and everybody asked for it. So we're going to do the same class. So hopefully the people who are showing up are not the same people that were here last week, and you can go ahead and go back to work. Now, we have also muted your mics, but if anybody has any questions, you can post them in our Q&A section at any time. We will answer them after the class. Now, as far as what else we're going to, there we go. Um, you need to verify that your installed version is current. If not, you will need to update whatever the latest version is that we have out right now, because that is going to be the tax table for year end. You also will need to post all your current year payroll records and then apply the year end update, as that is actually what is going to be changing the Social Security maximum and any federal and state tax tables. Okay. Now, what are we going to be learning today? We're going to be finding out which is better for you, closing or archiving payroll. And I will show you how we actually will do that. I will show you how we're going to be advancing the default posting period and also how to update payroll calculations for the new year. Okay. Now, should you close or archive? You can close payroll very simply under the 538 screen. And you may only get that if you have version 25 or higher. If you don't see that, that's definitely a reason to upgrade. And it's very simple. All you have to do is click the button, close payroll, and you'll get a message. And hang on one second because I want to change my company. Let's see if I've closed payroll on this one. Normally, we do want you to have exclusive access because when you go to close, we don't want anybody in the program at the same time. Um, so when you go to close, of course, I've already closed all my years. It's going to say you will need to compute payroll after you've closed. So all this is doing is closing payroll, but it doesn't remove your payroll records. That's the nice thing about closing. All it does is reset your year-to-date numbers for all the calculations and any earnings so that when you run reports, you can run them for last year and it'll have all the information, and you can also run them for this year and it'll have all the information. You do have to be both a company administrator and a payroll administrator rights in order to be able to do this. Now, the reason we gave that option is because workers' comp audits always happen every year. And we know that when you archive, most people have to run reports in the archive, and they also have to run reports in the current year. But if you just close, what happens is all the information that you need is still here. So in other words, you're up to this year, which is 2024, you're going to see all your payroll records. However, because I've already closed, you'll notice on the employee that there is no year-to-date information. All of that has been reset. there are no earnings. All of that information has been reset. So in other words, when you go run a report for workers' comp, you can do it for the check date, January through December, or whatever date they want, all the way through the next year. Example, if you've already done payroll for 2025, once you close and they need through January, you can literally say through January over here, and it'll give you all the information you need. Now, there are a couple of other reports that also work with closing. For instance, the year to date, you'll notice there's one that shows prior year, and that's all the information you're going to get is for prior year, quarter and year to date. You can also do your state tax report. If you'll notice down here, there's a box that says prior year. There are only a couple of reports that will do that. The rest of them all ask for a check date. Now, one of the things that when you do the close and the archive are explained in the articles, and those are also mentioned in the Q&A section. It gives you a few more steps on how to be able to do that. So once you have posted all your payroll and you're ready to actually do next year, you want to make sure you either close or archive before you do that, because when you close and all that information is gone and you now are ready to do your new payroll, it starts with brand new, like for instance, Social Security, it's going to have a maximum, and we don't want any of last year or prior year included in that in order to be able to do your payroll. Now, as far as what is the last date when you post payroll, you want to make sure that you have the last check date, not pay period. Example, if your pay period is December 26th, but your check date is actually going to be January 1 or 2, that is next year, because the IRS considers what check date you use as to the liability and the W-2. Okay? When you have done your very last payroll with a check date for this year, and you've gone ahead and posted it, now you want to close. Now, the difference between whether you can close or whether you should archive, you cannot remove any payroll calculations. So for instance, if you have to clean house, because there are some calculations that were not used most of the year, if they haven't been used at all, you can get rid of them. However, if they were used part of the year, they will be grayed out and you cannot delete them. The only way you can get rid of them is if you archive payroll. It also does not allow you to get rid of employees. You can only do that by getting rid of, by doing the archive. And with the new version, you're allowed to get rid of laid off, quit, terminated, deceased, and retired, whereas before you were only allowed one or two of those. You can also get rid of inactive employees. Before you weren't able to do that at all. Now, if you don't mind having those still in there, you can archive at any time. Once you close, you can archive any time in the year. You can archive 2 years from now. It does not matter. Okay. So those are the only things that are really different between closing and archive. However, you may need help with archiving because that has to be done on the server in a software called Database Admin. If you're a standalone, you will have all of that information on your own computer, like mine is. I'm a standalone, so I have everything on my machine. However, you can be a standalone and still have a separate server. That means that you may need help from an IT person or your business partner. We can even do that if we need to. You would actually have to talk to Extra Services, but there would be a cost for that. Okay. Now, that concludes the part about closing or archiving. So the next segment we're going to talk about is once you have decided whether you want to close or archive, install the update and done any other housekeeping tasks that you may need to. And the article for that will also be in the Q&A section. You may need to reconcile payroll reports, etc. You will want to advance your default posting period in order to be able to post your new payroll, because you definitely don't want to post them to period 12 of the previous year. So all you have to do is, let's get Sage back up here. Okay, so in order to advance, and again, you need to make sure you are logged in with administrator rights and exclusive, and you don't want any other transactions open, because as soon as you log in again with exclusive access, it is going to close that down. So you'll lose whatever you might have been doing. So all you're going to do is go into 1.6 and click change period. Now, when you go to change a period, it is going to run an audit. That means it's going to look at, are your balances connected to your ledger accounts? Is there a ledger connected to an invoice and vice versa? Is there a payment connected to the invoice? And if any of that goes through with no problem, then it'll say you want to change a period. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. If you are not up to date, the current period will say whatever period you are defaulted to right now. I happen to be in period 12. But it says you can change it to period 1. Here's what it does. It goes to the audit and it says the audit was completed successfully. If there's any problems, it'll tell you. For right now, we're going to say, yes, I want to advance. When you do that, it says period 2 to 12 are now available. Okay, but let me show you what happens if we go back so you can see what it looks like. We're going to go ahead and go back to November, actually wrong year. Let's go back 1 year. And we're going to go back to November of this year. And it doesn't do the audit when I'm going backwards, so we're just going to change it. But I want you to see what it does when you go to period 12. Okay. So normally, I guess because I already changed it, you would get a message like what I did before that actually says period 1 is now available. And then once I go to period 2 or period 1, it says now period 2 through 12 are available. You can still post to them. It's just that they don't actually show as available until you actually go forward 1. Okay. Now, once you change your default, you are allowed to lock previous months if you don't want anybody looking at them or doing anything to them. All you have to do is select that and you get the lock access. When you do that, Nobody has access to post, void, or make any changes unless they happen to be an admin. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about that because I am a standalone. However, like I said, with the change period, here's the important thing. If you're not caught up, so again, let's go back to a couple and let's say your default period was August. Okay. If at that point you were in August, it says the current period is this. You want to change it to this. You do not have to do month by month. You literally can jump all the way to 12, go ahead and select, and then it'll run through the audit again. Okay. If everything is okay, it will go ahead and allow you to change it. Okay. Now, when you get to year end, if there are any audit errors, it may say, sometimes recalculate will fix your problems. Do you want to do that now? You want to say yes, because when the audit goes through, it's looking at, do your period balances match your ledger accounts? It's like they get out of sync periodically. And if that happens, then you want to go ahead and recalculate, and you may be fine with nothing else. If that's the case, it'll come up and say, there are no auditors, you want to change the period. You go ahead and say yes, and you're good to go. However, if there are any audit errors, and I think I actually have a company that shows that. Let's see. Oh, I might have gotten rid of them. Yeah. So if you have any audit errors, then what's going to happen is you have to actually have them fixed by us because we have to go in the back door. Let's see if this one will actually do it. Nope. So for instance, you might have an invoice that doesn't have a ledger, or you might have an invoice that's voided and the ledger is open. What needs to be done is you have to contact our live chat, let them know that you have an audit error, and then they will set you up, schedule you for a file fix. You cannot move forward if you are changing it to period 12. However, if you are going from period 8 to 9 or 10 or whatever, it will say you have an auditor, but you can still change your period. Do you want to do that now? You can go ahead and change your default period, but that audit error needs to be fixed at some point before year end. Once you have the audit error fixed, then you can go ahead and move forward to period 1. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to. Now, you can still go ahead and post because one is going to be available. So for instance, if we come up here and it shows us period 12, all you have to do is change next year and one will be available. So you can still post to it even though that is not your default period. Okay. So if there are any questions about changing your default period, again, you can go ahead and post them to our Q&A section. One thing I want to remind you, you're always able to post backwards. So even if you have changed it to period 12 or even period 1 so you can get payroll done, you can always post backwards. There is not any problem with that. If you notice here, all you have to do is change your fiscal year and you can change it to any other year you need to post to. Okay. And let's go ahead and get out of there. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and go back over. And I want to go to updating your payroll records. Okay. This is actually very important because there are certain things that when you have finished posting all your payroll and you're ready to do your current payroll, you go ahead and update your payroll tax table. You will need help with that unless you're standalone, like when you're archiving, because that again has to be done on the server. However, there are certain things that we will do that we don't do with the payroll tax table. So for instance, when you've updated, we will put a message in there that shows what the Social Security maximum is. In other words, when you go into the payroll calculation, let's just look at that real quick, and you are getting ready to change what its maximum is. So I'm going to show you what kind of message you'll get. We don't actually change the amount. All we do is we give you a message. So here's what it says. The maximum amount of wages subject to employee withholding of Social Security for the, and now it will say 2025, is this. Do you want to say? So all you have to do is make sure you put in the correct amount of money. And then when you go ahead and get done adding it, so for this year, for instance, we know it was 168,600. At that point, once you have changed the maximum, all you have to do is go to options. Come on, go away. Let's drag that down. There we go. Okay, and then go to options, click update employees. And if you are changing the default rate, select that and then click employees with this calculation because you do not want it to give it to somebody who doesn't have it. Maybe they're exempt for whatever reason. So you always want to say employees with this calculation. Now, if all you're doing is changing the maximum, you can select that. And same thing, it'll either say all employees with this calculation or current employees. I prefer doing all because when you get done doing this, you're going to run a repair, payroll repair. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And if you have somebody who has not been updated, even though they're not current, you're going to get an order. So just a call. Okay. All right. Now, again, as far as updating payroll calculations, there is an article that actually shows which ones should be updated in our Q&A, and I'll show you that in just a minute. We put a message for Social Security, and we change federal and state tax tables. We do not change anything else. So for instance, if SUTA comes back and says they have a new rate for you or a new maximum, you want to come in here and change it. If disability has changed its rate, workers' comp, any of that, some of it gets changed in here and some of it gets changed in other places. Example, workers' comp gets changed on the table. All you have to do is change wherever you have the rate, and then it will be affected the next time you do payroll. Okay? If you are using pay groups have their own benefit. So for instance, number one only has a cash benefit. If that rate has been changed, you change it here. And whenever you use that pay group, it is automatically going to use a higher rate. This particular one, let's see, where's the one that has bunch of calculations on it. There we go. So for instance, if you have one that union benefits control it, you may need to change every single one of them. Again, when you use that pay group on the time card, it is automatically going to use the higher rate. Okay. So let's go back to our, okay. Bear with me 1 second. There we go. Okay. So we've already talked about the calculations, and there's the article that we were talking about. And there is also a video on how to be able to make the change on those particular calculations. Let's see. Okay, one other thing we want to talk about, and I'm going to go ahead and get out of here again. So one of the things that when you're done closing payroll or archive, whatever you may need to do, you verified that your FICA and Medicare have the right maximum. The one thing you want to do before you actually start doing new payroll is run a payroll audit. Now, I had mentioned that before. This is under 537. I always prefer going directly to repair because it will do the audit at the same time. So when you click that, it says employee totals would be calculated from payroll record. Do you want to continue? Yes. It's going to go through looking at all of them and then running the audit. And if there are any errors, it will tell you. So for instance, some of the errors that might be a problem, it might say quarter doesn't match check date. You have this many computed records, this many posted records, or it might say Social Security maximum doesn't match, or Social Security is this amount, or Medicare is this amount. So example, if it says quarter doesn't match check date, most people may start doing the payroll early. For instance, with a December check, that's right at the very beginning, or even a January check, that's right at the very beginning. The pay period, excuse me, might have been right up until the end of November. So they're doing it in a particular quarter. Actually, November, December doesn't match because that's already in quarter 4. Let's go back to July, August, September. The end of September is quarter 3. However, the check is going to be written in October, which is now quarter 4. Okay. What the program is going to do automatically is that check date is going to show up on the day that you are creating the time cards. And the quarter is going to match it. So for instance, if you happen to be doing it because the pay period ends on September 30th, this check date is actually going to be September 30th. And the quarter is going to show 3. What you're going to need to do is, because you actually printed the checks as of October 1, you will need to go in and change your quarter to 4, very simply. And of course, if you've got the wrong check date, well, you can go ahead and change that to match a quarter, but usually it's the other way around. Now, if you've got something that says employee maximum doesn't match, then I always like to start from here, because that means that you probably did only current employees. So I make sure this is correct. I come up here to options, update employees. I select the maximum only, and that's when I want to use all employees with this calculation. That way, those employees that didn't match will go away. Now, if there was a problem where the employee balance doesn't match the audit, that again is something that has to be fixed. I'm not going to go into that right now because that may be a little bit more information. However, the article will be in the Q&A and it'll have some links so that you can actually be shown how to fix it. And I think that may conclude the information about doing a payroll repair. I do recommend running that payroll repair as part of your payroll processing because that way you can catch it if there's a problem with something every time you do payroll. For instance, if you have voided payroll record, it may cause things to get out of whack. Here's an example. You've already done a couple of paychecks and for whatever reason you found that something was wrong. So you went in and voided that record. At that point, the program does not know that that amount of year to date has not been included in the rest of the year to date or has not been taken out and should not be included. Once you run the repair, now you're telling the program, recalculate your year to date numbers. And now it looks a little bit more realistic. And then when you go ahead and recreate that paycheck, now that year to date number is correct. However, you may find later on if you don't run the repair, now all of a sudden you're so screwed in Medicare or whatever, it's either showing too high or too low, and you have to fix them. That's why that repair is so important. Okay. All right, let me just verify that there is something that you may need to know about this that I haven't covered. And I can't think of something, so I'm just going to cover something real quick that I'm sure a lot of you are probably going to have questions about. Once, and this isn't going to have to be done until probably sometime in January, but when you have to start doing W-2s, they're normally going to be done in 541 screen. Now, I've already updated, so you'll notice I showed 2024. So normally when you do your W-2s, you do them from here. When you come in, so this leads back to if you just closed payroll, right? It used to be that if you archived, you would run the W-2s from your archive. Not anymore. All you have to do is change your year, run the W-2s right here, and then it may say, hey, you have to update. That's Atrix. Go ahead and run the update. It is then going to change these from 2023 to 24. As soon as the update is done, you can go ahead and run those. And it's going to ask you a lot of questions. It's going to go through a grid. I'm not going to go into detail on that because they have, that is not our software for one, and they also have a little help like a question mark in the upper right hand corner that allows you to, anytime you need help on a screen, you can just click on that and it'll give you more information about what you're doing. But this is where you start running that form in the first place. And I think that concludes our information on what we were going to learn today. So again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And Emily will actually be answering those for you or letting me know what kind of questions are on there.
Yes, hi everyone. We do actually have some Q&As all ready to go. So if you are ready, Catherine, I can go ahead and start reading those out to you.
Lead do.
Alrighty. The first one we have is, what if we have to reprint a check that's in a different quarter?
So the quarter actually is not controlled by when you need to print a check anyway. Anytime you want to print a check, that's always going to be done under 524. That is determined by the date that you're printing it. So example, let's suppose that that check was originally printed in Q3. Well, the date on that would have been sometime between July and September. If we're printing it again now, the check date again is what determines when that's going to go to the bank rack, or well, that's pretty much all that determines it. It's still done in the original quarter. That has not changed. You already paid the taxes on that in Q3. So you can go ahead and reprint it up here. The only thing that is important about that is that once you find the payroll record, you want to remember to change the check number to 4 zeros. Otherwise, you won't even be able to print it. And we do have an article on how to be able to reprint a paycheck if necessary, but you shouldn't have to worry about that.
Awesome. All right, let's see what we have for the next up. The next one we have is, what happens if you don't close the payroll at the end of the year and then continue on with your next year's payroll?
That's important. So first of all, that was one of the things I had mentioned when I showed you the employee. When you close, it resets all the information under your calculation. So for instance, you're not going to have any year-to-date information at all. If you do not close, and this is the one that's so important, let's suppose this employee has already reached his maximum for Social Security. You'll be wondering why Social Security is not even computing. Medicare doesn't have a maximum, so it's just going to keep on going. There are some other ones like SUDA or FUDA that have maximums. Like you can see the wage limit is 7,000. And you'll wonder why that didn't compute. That's why you have to close, because otherwise, if you don't, and you have gone ahead and computed payroll for the current year, you're going to undo those. If you've posted them, you're going to void and then close and redo them all over again. We do have this new feature that if you have only computed them, you are allowed to undo the compute, which is really nice because that means you don't have to void it. Go ahead and do the close for 24, and then you can go ahead and recompute those payroll records. Okay, so yes, that is very important.
All right, and it looks like we may have one more, unless we see some next ones roll in. Our last one that I have is, does the vendor close when you close the payroll year if you have a fiscal year end in February? Looks like they want to know if vendor records are affected by a payroll close.
So first of all, payroll only affects payroll. It does not affect anybody else. No jobs, no vendors, GL, nothing. Those are connected to your fiscal close. So for instance, when you close payroll under 538, where are we? Right here. All that does is reset your calculation year to date and reset your earnings year to date. That's all. It has nothing to do with vendors. Those are all done with your 1099 that you may need to do for year end. Those are normally controlled on a payroll year, but you can still run them even after closing payroll. In fact, you could still close them even after closing your fiscal because they are a January to December connection, not a fiscal connection. And that 1099 is on the vendor anyway. So I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. That does look like it's it for our Q&A at the current time. Why don't we end on showing off our year-end center for everybody to see what a great resource that is?
Okay, and let's go ahead and pull that back up. Come on. All right, so we want to go to, and here, I had it open the other day. Oh, wait, no, come on. Okay, where was that? No, there we go. Okay, so this is some information on how to be able to streamline your end. It doesn't have a lot of information. However, there we go. This is our year-end center. There is a lot of information there that you can just click on to get to anything you may need information on. This is some information on year-end training for the US and Canada. These are some checklists. This is a timeline that literally has everything, not just what we talked about. Um, they have them for both the Canadian and the US checklist. This is where you can get your updates from. So it is really nice for information that you may need about the year end. And you can always go ahead and bookmark that. That link, if I remember right, is also going to be in the Q&A section. So you can just click on it and bookmark it that way.
Awesome. Thank you so
Okay,
much, Catherine.
you're
Unless you
welcome.
have,
Did we get everything covered today that anybody had any questions about?
it looks like we got everything covered. So
Okay.
unless you have any other great nuggets of wisdom for us, it looks like we are good.
All right. Well, in that case, like I said, this is going to be recorded. Hopefully it is working, not like last week. And that means you can get the recording once they've uploaded it also in the Q&A section. Or it might also be on the community forum, like where the UN is. All right. Everybody have a great day and a great holiday.